The most steadfast truth in life is that God's plans for you are unshakable. Every detail of your existence is held together by His divine hand, and His purposes for you are filled with good intentions. Imagine a master architect carefully crafting the blueprints for a magnificent structure. Every line and detail is intentional and meaningful. This is how God views your life, a masterpiece created with love, care, and purpose. Today, we will delve into how God's plans for your life are specific, intentional, and brimming with hope. Let us also reflect on powerful biblical examples that illustrate these truths. The certainty of God's plan. Jeremiah 29 tells us that God knows the plans He has for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us hope and a future. This assurance is not tied to our circumstances, but rests on the unchanging faithfulness of God. Even when life feels uncertain, God's plan remains steadfast. Proverbs 16 teaches us that while a man may plan his way, it is ultimately the Lord who directs his steps. This harmonious balance between human intention and divine guidance reveals that God's plan is always superior and rooted in eternal love. Consider the life of Samuel. Samuel was born to Hannah, a woman who prayed fervently for a child and vowed to dedicate him to the Lord. True to her promise, she brought Samuel to serve under Eli the priest. As a young boy, Samuel heard God's voice calling him, marking the beginning of his journey as a prophet. At a time when visions were rare, Samuel became a vessel for God's guidance to Israel. His life reminds us that God's plans often begin long before we realize them, and that His timing is always perfect. Another example is Noah, a man described as righteous and blameless in his generation. In a world filled with corruption, God chose Noah to build an ark to preserve life during the flood. Though it must have seemed unreasonable at the time, Noah's obedience to God's plan resulted in the salvation of his family and countless creatures. This story shows that even when God's plans seem beyond understanding, they are always purposeful. God's plan in moments of failure. Psalm 37 reminds us that the steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord.
Even when that person stumbles, they will not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds them with His hand. God uses our weaknesses and mistakes to bring about His glory and our growth.
Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, serves as a powerful example of redemption. Peter was known for his passion and boldness, yet he faltered when fear overtook him. After denying Jesus 3 times, Peter was filled with remorse. However, after Jesus' resurrection, He lovingly restored Peter, asking him 3 times, "Do you love me?" and commissioning him to feed his sheep. This transformation led Peter to become a fearless leader of the early church, proving that failure does not disqualify us from God's plan. Consider also the story of Jonah. God commanded Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach repentance, but Jonah fled in the opposite direction. Despite Jonah's disobedience, God used a storm and a great fish to bring him back to his mission. Jonah's eventual obedience led to the salvation of an entire city. His story illustrates that God can redirect us even when we stray, ensuring His plans are fulfilled. Lydia in Acts 16 is another inspiring figure. A businesswoman dealing in purple cloth, Lydia was also a worshiper of God. When Paul shared the gospel with her, the Lord opened her heart to respond. Lydia's home became a gathering place for believers, showing that God's plans often unfold through ordinary lives and circumstances. Trusting God's timing. Isaiah 55 reminds us that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. Trusting in God's plan often requires waiting, which can be one of the most challenging aspects of faith. Yet, this waiting season is not wasted. It is a time of preparation and refinement. Joseph's life is a testament to this truth. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, and later imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, Joseph could have succumbed to despair. Instead, he trusted in God's sovereignty. Years later, he was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, where he saved countless lives during a famine. In Genesis 50, Joseph declares, "What you meant for harm, God intended for good." His story teaches us that even long periods of waiting are part of God's perfect plan. Consider Abraham and Sarah, who waited decades for God's promise of a son to be fulfilled. Despite moments of doubt, their faith in God's promise was rewarded with the birth of Isaac, through whom God's covenant was established. Their journey reminds us that God's timing often tests and strengthens our faith. Living with purpose, understanding God's plan for your life begins with a relationship with Him. Ephesians 2 reminds us that we are His workmanship, created for good works, which God prepared beforehand. This means your life has unique value and purpose. Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement, exemplifies living with purpose. He was instrumental in supporting Paul during the early days of his ministry, and played a key role in the growth of the early church. Barnabas used his gifts of encouragement and generosity to strengthen others, showing that living with purpose often involves uplifting those around us. David's life also reflects purposeful living. As a young shepherd, he faithfully tended his flock, unaware that this experience would prepare him to lead a nation. When he faced Goliath, his confidence came not from his own strength, but from his trust in God. David's story reminds us that no experience is wasted in God's plan, and that faithfulness in small things leads to greater opportunities. Living with purpose also involves trusting God in the unknown. Esther, a young Jewish woman, became queen of Persia at a critical time for her people. When faced with the opportunity to save her people from destruction, she courageously said, "If I perish, I perish," choosing to trust God's plan for her life. Esther's bravery saved her people and demonstrated that God's purpose often requires us to step out in faith. Conclusion: God's plan for your life is rooted in His love and faithfulness. It is a plan that brings hope, purpose, and transformation. Trust in Him, surrender your control, and walk boldly in the path He has set before you. Remember, His plans are for your good and His glory. Even in seasons of uncertainty, take heart, knowing that He is guiding your steps and shaping your life for eternal impact. As Romans 8 assures us, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Trust in the hands of the Creator, for He is not finished with you yet.